You couldn't have written the stories of my guests today, and if you had, no one would believe it. It truly is a story of great good coming out of great tragedy. Ryan and Jessica, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Jessica, I want to start with you because, you were married to Jason and life was going well. You're in your second pregnancy, but it ran into a problem. What happened?
Yeah, we were living our dream life and we quickly found out we were pregnant again with our second child. I went to what I thought was a 20-week ultrasound appointment, and it was there that we were told that the baby had experienced a stroke in utero and there was very little hope. It was suggested that we terminate and try again. The doctor said, you're young and healthy, you won't have any problems getting pregnant. And we did not terminate. We instead chose to put the baby in the Lord's hands, and Lucas came out screaming with life on August 12, 2004. And after undergoing brain surgery and spending 2 weeks in the NICU, we were sent home.
Wow, and how tough was that decision to keep him not knowing what the future would look like?
It wasn't difficult, and my faith would not allow me to just terminate. I couldn't live with myself, and so I was very content to put the baby in the Lord's hands and just allow His will to be done in that child's life and in our life, really.
Now, Lucas did survive, which was a miracle in itself, but he did have some challenges. So what was life like with Lucas?
We left the hospital with kind of this umbrella special needs diagnosis, and I was just thrilled to be a mom to this miracle baby who I had been told would die. That didn't negate from the challenges he had. He was delayed in every aspect of life. He had a 2-year-old size head at birth, and so he would drag it along as he would crawl. He didn't walk until much later in life, and even sleeping was so challenging because if he happened to flip over in the middle of the night, he would have suffocated. And so I never slept, just, keeping a vigilant eye on him all night long. And he wasn't a great sleeper either. But by the grace of God, we somehow made it through those first couple of years and kind of got into our new normal with special needs.
Okay, and then you received a diagnosis about your husband, Jason. Mm-hmm. What was that?
Yeah, after our daughter Mabel was born in 2007, Jason started having all of these health problems. Lost a ton of weight, disorientation, vision loss, and it was so strange. He kept being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. He was like the epitome of health. He owned a gym, he was a tennis professional, a personal trainer, and they were just like, you got to get your diabetes under control. And then one night he passed out at home, was rushed to the local ER, and they discovered a baseball-sized brain tumor.
Wow. That started off 3 years of fighting for his life. What were those 3 years like?
Oh, so intense. We ended up discovering we were pregnant again in the middle of that. And it was after I was probably 3 or 4 months pregnant with our 4th child that the cancer returned. And this time it was a stage 4 glioblastoma. And so I continued that pregnancy. I was raising 3 young children, including Lucas, who had profound disabilities, and Jason ended up in hospice care a couple of months after I gave birth to our son. He ended up passing away 1 month before our infant son turned 1 year old, and it was just literally hanging on for dear life, just lamenting and wailing and begging God to make it stop until really about 2 weeks before he passed away, when I just surrendered and said, I don't understand why you would make me walk such a difficult path, but I choose to trust you, and I choose to believe that you can make beauty out of all of these ashes.
It must have been a really hard moment.
Yeah, it was.
So you're a mom of 4 kids, one only a month old, one with incredible needs that needed care, and a new widow. You start blogging. Mm-hmm. Why did you start blogging?
Well, I blogged through Jason's cancer journey, so I was blogging through the 3 years just to basically keep the masses updated. People wanted to know, how can we help you? How can we pray? And so it was just really to get some encouragement for myself and to receive those prayers and just to keep the masses updated.
So at the same time, Ryan, you're happily married to Casey. Everything is going well. You have how many kids at that point?
3.
You have 3 kids.
Yeah.
Now, she received a devastating diagnosis. What happened to her?
So just 2 months after our 3rd child was born, she started getting these extreme headaches, and we just assumed that it was postpartum symptoms like a lot of people suffer through. And she kind of just blew it off. And then finally, a week after her 30th birthday, she said, I think I'm going to go get it checked out. I went back to work and like it was no big deal. And I got a frantic phone call, you need to come home. And she couldn't say anything else. And so she was diagnosed that day with a brain tumor. And within days, we had biopsy and checkups, and then it had some issues with it after the biopsy, and basically lost her at that point mentally. And she passed away in August. So our youngest was just 8 months old when she
So
passed.
how quick was that from diagnosis to
It
losing
was just
her?
5 months.
Wow.
Yeah, it was so fast.
I think it's so interesting, Jessica, because you grieved your husband a lot over those 3 years of the cancer battle, but you probably didn't even have time to breathe.
No, I didn't have a chance. And it's funny that you say it because I blogged too, but it was very similar to what Jess was doing. I didn't want to do it. It wasn't something I enjoyed doing, but it was something that updated everyone during the struggle. And after she passed away, it did become a lifeline for me.
Okay, so this part of the story, some random stranger reads both your blogs, and you lost your spouses how many days apart?
4.
4 days apart. So some random stranger says, you guys have a very similar story. You should talk to each other, encourage each other. So who got the message? It was
I
you.
did, and I lived in Michigan. He lived in Oklahoma. She lived in Pennsylvania.
And we didn't, neither one of us
Neither
knew
of
her
us
personally.
knew like her from, like there was no connection whatsoever.
Wow.
Just a total stranger.
And so you just took the risk, and what did you say to him?
Well, she reached out on Halloween night. Like I got my kids all ready. We went out trick-or-treating. I posted the pictures on Facebook to show everybody, I was alive. I was caring for my children, and I came home, put them to bed, and checked my blog. And she reached out and she just said, Jess, I have no idea why I'm asking you to do this, but there's this young widower in Oklahoma. He has 3 young kids. His wife died from brain cancer, and I just think you would be a source of encouragement to him. And so I found his blog and left a comment, and I woke up the next day to an email from Ryan.
Now, you were really in rough shape at this point in your life.
Yeah.
You lost your wife so quickly. You had 3 young kids you were taking care of. What was your state of mind at that point?
I was lonely. I felt isolated, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I had basically just decided, okay, this is my new life. I'm going to be alone. I'm going to be with my kids. So how can I be the best dad to them and help them grieve? And because my oldest was just 7, so I had a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a baby that I was, still feeding with a bottle and putting to bed at night. And so it was a challenge from that perspective. But I never gave up on my faith. So I just trusted that God still had a plan. I didn't know what it looked like, or I honestly hadn't thought about another spouse. It didn't even cross my mind. So I would sit down with my kids at night and just pray with them, do a little devotion with them, or read them a bedtime story. And then one night I went in there, and my son, whose name is Tate, he was just 7 years old, and he just said, Dad, when am I going to get a new mom? And it was gut-wrenching at the time to hear him say that. It was so soon after his mom had passed, but he had a void to fill, and he knew that. Like, he loved his mom, but he knew he wanted that in the future, and that started to change the narrative for me. So my prayers changed. So that night I just prayed and said, God, I don't know what's going on or why you would put me through this, why I have to go through this trauma, but I know you have a plan for my life because I know you have a plan for my son. Very soon after, I woke up to an email from Jessica. So that was a God thing. And that, by asking God, show me, and then for him to have a sign that fast, it just blew me away. And I knew right away that this was from him. And I didn't think about her being my next wife, but I thought, okay, God is opening this door for somebody to grieve with. So she can help me through this. And she was fantastic. She showed me how to face forward and not live in the past and not let that define me, but to live in the present and say, okay, I still have a future. God kept me around for something, so now pursue it.
So what were those first conversations like between the two of you as you're both so fresh in grief?
Yeah, we pretty much poured out our hearts to each other just about our loss and about our families. And he had a lot of questions about Lucas. And but we had both blogged too, so we were like devouring each other's blogs because there was so much information, that we had shared with the world that we could now read for ourselves. And I think within about a week or two, it kind of shifted to, there are definitely feelings here, and do you want to hop on a phone call and see where this leads?
Wow. And so what was that like for you on the phone with her, and meeting her for the first time happened about a month in, right? That you met?
It was a challenging time, honestly, because we still needed to grieve. But I think we determined just weeks later that we probably shouldn't grieve together, because we're grieving over a love that we had over another person as we're falling in love, and that doesn't mix well. So those conversations, though, were life. It brought energy back to my life that I hadn't had in a long time. So it was a joy.
We were definitely falling in love. We didn't really know the logistics of how are we going to do this. I'm in Michigan, you're in Oklahoma. We have 7 children between the two of us. It felt very God ordained. Like, yes, we're supposed to get married. How quickly can we do this and still have it like be appropriate to the world? But we were just so kind of in our own little bubble. And honestly, after having walked through such a challenging path for so many years, I don't know that we really cared all that much. We felt like we were following God's will. We were very concerned about the children, and then ourselves, and everybody else was just going to have to kind of get in line because we were going to be moving forward with this.
And now, Ryan, as you're thinking seriously about Jessica, you also had to think seriously about, I'm taking on, a young son with profound special needs, which you hadn't done before. What were your thoughts as you processed that idea?
I trusted that God created this. I mean, he created me for her, and he created her for me. And I think that was always in the cards for him. Maybe we didn't understand it. I don't always understand why we had to go through the traumas that we had to meet each other, but that was ordained. So it wasn't any different for me to process that. I don't think you could really prepare for what that entails. You just have to live it. So if you live by faith, and we leap, I mean, everyone who knows us knows that if God says, that's what we do. And we don't really ask permission from anyone else. We let him take us through it, and we trust in him all the way.
That's so beautiful. Now, how quickly from that first email or comment on his blog to the wedding? Was it about 6 months?
Yeah.
It was probably,
pretty fast.
It might have been a few more months than that.
Well,
but when I got that email, we met a month later.
Yeah, about 6 weeks later.
In Savannah, Georgia, and both of us knew in that moment. We walked by a wedding chapel and said, I could marry you right now. So I think we knew from the moment we met. I think, honestly, we knew when we first talked on the phone.
About the first week, yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so it was just meant to be.
Okay, so you're married, you're still grieving, you have 7 children between the two of you, one with intense special needs. What is that first year like for the two of you?
It really had nothing to do with the kids. It was more about navigating all these blended things that nobody tells you about.
Extended families
and meshing households. And I don't really care for the style that you're bringing into my house. And I thought I was the wife and the mom, and don't I get to pick what our house looks like? And just so many complexities, and then grieving still and helping him navigate, because he hadn't really reached sort of the point of acceptance that I had reached, because my journey was 3 years, and I had really kind of come to a peace at the end of it, and he was still trying to navigate that and kind of using me as a therapist. And I'm like, I don't know that I want to be used as your therapist, navigating this really complex.
Yeah. Well, and the kids were fairly easy, but they were still grieving also.
Yeah.
So 7 grieving kids. I think in the very beginning, they just loved it because they had all these new friends, and they had, one half had a new mom, the other half had a new dad, and it was great for them. But I'm sure they had to sort out but now what? Now what? Do I call her mom? Do I call him dad?
Yeah.
And they dealt with some of that same stuff at such little kids that were so young, but yet they weren't so unsure about how to handle us. And we just decided that first year, we decided we're going to adopt each other's kids. We're all going to live under the name Ronnie, and we're going to become a family. And we just decided that blending was going to be difficult enough with all the extended family. So we're just going to take the reins and say, no more. I'm not stepdad and she's not stepmom. This is mom and dad, period.
Talk to me about Lucas growing up, hitting puberty, like the changes, right? Because you were that caregiving mom, and I'm sure you were in agreement. We're going to care for him forever. Like you thought, this was going to be my role for the rest of my life because this is what having a child with profound special needs means.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you even asked Ryan about meeting Luke, he was just little. He was 6, and he was just this cute little boy. A 6-year-old in diapers isn't really that big of a deal. But a 16-year-old in diapers who's now screaming and aggressive and has behavioral challenges, and he's lashing out at his siblings. And so Ryan just kind of was dad right along with me being mom to Luke. And then when he began to go through puberty, that's when we were both like, oh, this is forever, and it's getting really, really challenging, and he's really hard. And that's when I really started to grieve the fact that I was a special needs mom. I don't even know that I viewed myself as like a special needs mom. I was just mom to my miracle baby Luke. But yeah, when his health was deteriorating, he ended up in ER a couple of times with panic attacks that resembled heart attacks. And Luke's screaming. We feel like the walls are caving in our rural Tennessee home that we thought we were going to live in forever. There's no resources, no support for families like ours. And it was like, we need to do something or we're going to die living out here. Like, this house is literally going to become our tomb if we don't figure out a solution.
Wow. And you say this is a common thing you see among caregiving families, is that they never, ever want to put that their special needs person in care because of obviously the vulnerability, the worry that someone won't love them the way that you love them or care for them that way, or abuse can happen. So what was that journey like for you to make that really tough decision? Because you ended up, he's living down the road right now from you where you live in Michigan.
Yeah, it was a process. When he was a little boy, I promised, Luke, you're going to live with me forever and I'm always going to take care of you. And I truly believed it, that was my role, to be his mom and his caregiver forever. And then he began to grow up and go through puberty. And it was like, if a yes to being Luke's primary caregiver for the rest of his life is a no to so many other things in my life, including my marriage, his siblings, my future grandchildren, myself, because you devote your whole life to this one individual and to their care. And so I started processing, what would that look like if we were to create a home for him? And it was about 5 years of touring homes, of printing off all the materials, of meeting with the right people. And then we finally found a property in 2022. And it was just absolutely perfect. And in fact, the Lord even kind of gave us a God blink, is what I call it, because we requested to close on Lucas's birthday, which is August 12. And so our realtor called the seller and she said, they'd like to close on August 12 because that's their son's birthday. And the seller started to cry and she said, that's my birthday. And so we closed on this property. Ryan spent the next about year and a half renovating it. And then they moved in February 2024, Lucas and 3 other disabled young adults. And now they have 24/7 care. It's about 10 minutes down the road from our house. We see him often, and he's doing amazing.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, a lot of people didn't understand that choice, but it saved your family. It probably saved your life. But how did he take it? Because he's actually loving it more than he loved living with you. I mean, sorry, Mom.
No,
but
I mean,
No,
that's
absolutely. What a
been
blessing.
a process too.
Yeah.
The first night was absolutely horrific because he did not understand why we were leaving him in this new house with a new bed and new people. We went home and laid in bed and cried and prayed all night because he just did not understand it. And then we went back the next day And we were like, hey, Luke. And we hung out with him for a little bit, and then he was like, bye, see you later. We were like, what?
That's it. Wow.
And
Okay.
we've processed, this is a 20-year-old young man. He probably doesn't necessarily want his mother like bathing him and changing him and feeding him. And now he lives with 3 other young adults who are around his age. His caregivers are all around his age. They do like fun movie nights, and they take him on fun outings and all these things that we didn't have the energy for.
Or time.
Or time. We have 8 kids and him, and he is just living his best life. He's gaining in independence and skills, and that there's always kind of that fear there, like you were referencing, abuse could happen, yeah, I suppose, but we pray every day for angels to surround that house. I entrust him to the Lord's care, just like I entrust all of my other kids to the Lord's care. And I have faith that God will protect him. He is like the least of these, and God cares for him more than I could ever care for him. Yeah. And it's just been an amazing thing for our whole family.
So I know there's people watching right now who maybe have someone in their life that they don't want to give up. And there's that mom guilt, right? Like, I'm their mom, I have to protect them. What advice would you give to them, especially if they're suffering maybe their mental health or their physical health or their marriage, as a result of trying to be that hero? What would you say?
Yeah, martyr caregiver syndrome is a very real thing. And I would say, that's great that you have that much love in you for this individual. But if you become ill, or worse yet, die because of never caring for yourself, like, you are no good to your loved one if that's what occurs. And so, it was absolutely a process for me too, and like finally releasing my child who I have cared for my whole life into really the Lord's care for him, and trusting that God will take care of him. And so much so that God kind of convicted me where my whole identity was wrapped up in being Luke's caregiver. All these things I've created have like stemmed from being his caregiver, so much so it was almost like God was saying, it's become a form of idolatry if you don't trust me with his care. And so learning to release that and say, okay, I trust you. And yes, he's doing incredible. I'm shocked. We're both shocked at how well he's doing.
And there's 3 others in that same house whose families are dealing with the exact same thing that we had to deal with. So 3 other families took that leap of faith too and said, we want this. And they were all hesitant, as we all are, but they did. They said, okay, we're going to try this and just see kind of how it goes. And it's funny, all the kids we call them kids, they're all adults, but they're kids to us. They're all thriving. So you have to make a choice and say, are you willing to give up the rest of your life or your marriage or whatever it's going to interfere with, by saying, I'm going to take this leap of faith and let God care for my loved one? It doesn't mean you let go of them. How many times a day does Luke come across our minds? Mm-hmm. We still wake up in the middle of the night and think we hear him. So I don't think that ever goes away. He's always part of us. But we watched our other kids go from elementary to middle school to high school to graduate, and we have 3 of our kids are adults now and out on their own besides Luke. We watched them go through that transition. It's only fair to let him try it too. And I think that's just giving parents permission to say, that's okay. Let God have it. Mm-hmm. Jesus, take the wheel. We hear that all the time.
Yeah.
So just let him take it from here, and he will. He'll lead you down it.
That's so wise. And one of the things I appreciate too is that, you both really see Lucas as a gift from God. And Jessica, you were saying, there's so many things that wouldn't exist in this world if you hadn't had Lucas. So if you hadn't made that decision during your pregnancy to keep him, who was not even supposed to live, what wouldn't exist in the world today? What has Lucas inspired for both of you?
It's interesting, even as you're asking this, I'm like, all of the inspiration came from his most challenging times as he was going through puberty. Like, up until the darkest days, we were just content to be mom and dad to Lucas. And then it got really dark. And that's when we created the nonprofit, the Lucas Project, which serves special needs families nationwide with a variety of programs and initiatives. That's when we created the Unseen documentary, How We're Failing Parent Caregivers and Why It Matters. That's when I created the podcast, Coffee with Caregivers, and the 4 books and all the advocacy work. And now we're working on another documentary called Uncertain, which will explore the housing crisis for disabled young adults and their families. So all of this stuff came from like our darkest days as parent caregivers to Lucas, because we were so desperate for some sort of resources and support. And so it's going back to that problem solver. Well, how are we going to solve this problem? And then our creations have helped so many other caregivers along the way.
You're giving people the gift you never had.
Yeah.
Which is God bringing beauty, I think, out of hard things. Ryan, what gifts do you think Lucas has given you? How are you different because of him?
You can't be self-centered when you have Lucas in your life, because I look at him and think sometimes I'm envious of how simple life is in his mind, because he wants very little, he expects very little, and he's always just happy. When we come around, he moves his head around and he knows you're there. And I've spent time with him in ICU, when he's had problems, and, just the presence of holding his hand, he senses me. Like he's as close to Jesus. I think when they talk about the least of these in the Bible, he's that, but that doesn't diminish them. I don't think God is saying that these are the least, like the bottom of the barrel. These are the ones that we should look to. These are the ones that say, I don't need all of this. I have everything I need.
And Jessica, you call a caregiving holy work. Mm-hmm. You have actually that sign above Lucas's bed. So what does that mean to you when you say it's holy work?
It just means caring for another individual who cannot care for themselves is the holiest work we can do, really this side of eternity, and so much so that it is modeling what Jesus came to do for us in his earthly ministry, caring for our physical needs, our spiritual needs, our mental needs, our emotional needs. And in caring for someone else, we are becoming more Christ-like. And so if we're modeling our Savior's example, that is the holiest work we can do here on earth, is to care for another human being.
It's a beautiful way to look at it. Now 14 years have gone by. Mm-hmm. Looking back at all that transpired in these 14 years, how are you both, one at a time, but how are you both spiritually processing this story?
I've just allowed God to say, take the lead. Like, just lead me. And sometimes that's scary. We took a leap of faith when we got married and I moved to Michigan. And that seemed like that's the hardest thing I think I'd ever had to do. And it's not, but it wasn't meant to be either. So I think each moment that we live in this life, sometimes there's challenges in it, but you see the light at the end of the tunnel and you know that we're heaven bound. And I don't want to live the life without her. It was meant to be always. So I do feel that, and I think that has drawn me closer to God in knowing that was always his plan.
I think for me, it's been recognizing that everything we go through in life is for God's glory. And there's a verse in Romans, and I believe it's Romans 11:26. I might have that wrong, but it's, to paraphrase, it's, why should we not go through hardships and trials? Because everything is to bring God glory. And I just look at our life and everything we've been through, and now sitting here with you even and sharing our story, it's all to bring God glory and to bring hope and encouragement to other individuals. And if our story, our humble little story, can do that, I mean, what greater gift that we can give to the world through our obedience. And as long as we continue to be obedient to whatever that next step is that he calls us to, and I'm pretty sure our life from here on out isn't just going to be super easy. I'm sure we'll have challenges, but it's our job to continuously be obedient, to follow his path, and then he will make beauty out of those ashes.